It was Christmas Eve, and the snow fell in soft, gentle layers over the grand Pemberton estate. The sight would have been magical if it weren't for the heavy weight pressing on Charlotte Pemberton's heart. Standing outside, wrapped in her thick wool coat, she could hear her grandmother's voice echoing in her mind, sharp and uncompromising. Bring a husband to Christmas dinner tomorrow, or lose your inheritance to your cruel cousin Marcus. Charlotte knew the stakes. Lady Pemberton, her beloved grandmother, was dying. She had no one else. The inheritance was everything. It meant the future of Charlotte's bookshop, a place that had been her sanctuary since her parents' death years ago. But Marcus, the greedy cousin, had long coveted the estate. If he got his hands on it, he would sell the land, evict the tenants, and tear down the bookshop she held so dear. Charlotte had always prided herself on being independent. She had built the bookshop from the ground up, and she refused to marry for convenience. But now, with no other choice, the pressure was overwhelming. She had one day to find a husband, someone to stand by her side, to fool her grandmother, and to secure her future. And as much as she hated the idea, it seemed like an impossible task. She had gone to every man she could think of. No one would commit to such a rushed marriage, especially not for one day. Charlotte stood there, alone in the snow, and a wave of helplessness washed over her. She knew that her stubbornness, her refusal to settle for anything less than love, had led her to this moment. But what choice did she have? Her eyes scanned the village, and then, just as she was about to turn and head back inside the estate, a figure caught her attention. A man was stepping out of a carriage at the village inn, his posture straight, his clothes finely tailored. He looked out of place in the quaint little village. His presence, poised and elegant, seemed like something out of a dream. But it wasn't his looks that intrigued Charlotte. It was the desperation in his eyes. It was a look she knew all too well. She didn't know why, but something inside her nudged her to act. She had no time to lose. She hurried over to him, walking quickly through the snowy path. "Excuse me," Charlotte said, her voice steady despite the nervousness rising in her chest. "I have an offer for you." The man turned to face her, his eyes scanning her face as if trying to place her, but Charlotte could see the exhaustion in his expression. She didn't wait for him to speak. "I need a husband," she continued, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "For one day. You need money and a place to stay. I can offer both if you'll marry me tonight. We'll play the part at my family's Christmas dinner tomorrow. I'll pay you enough to start fresh anywhere you wish." The man blinked, clearly taken aback. He was silent for a moment, as if weighing his options. His gaze shifted, and Charlotte saw the hesitation in his eyes. He looked like a man who had nothing left to lose. "I know it's a strange proposition," she said quickly, her voice softening. "But I'm desperate. My grandmother is dying. I need to protect my future. Please, I don't have time to explain everything. Will you do it?" The man seemed to think for another moment before he finally nodded, his decision made. "All right, I'll do it." Charlotte felt a rush of relief wash over her. It was a decision that would change everything. She just didn't know how much yet. Later that evening, the rush ceremony was held in the village church. The priest seemed reluctant but performed the service without protest, muttering a prayer under his breath. The man signed the marriage certificate with an unshakable hand. Charlotte wasn't looking for romance, wasn't looking for love. She was simply trying to survive, to protect her inheritance, to hold on to what was hers. She would keep her heart guarded. As they left the church, the man, her new husband, turned to her, his voice low. "You should know something," he began. But Charlotte, eager to be done with the night, cut him off. "I don't need to know anything. This is business." She didn't realize how much she would regret those words. The carriage ride to Pemberton Manor felt like an eternity. The snow outside fell in heavy flurries, muffling the sound of the world, creating a quiet cocoon around Charlotte and her new husband. As they approached the manor, Charlotte felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her chest. She had never imagined her life would come to this. A hastily arranged marriage to a man she knew nothing about, all for the sake of securing her inheritance. She glanced at James, who sat across from her, his face calm, betraying no hint of the chaos that had led them here. His eyes, however, were distant, haunted even, and Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something more than just a lack of money. "You're sure you'll be able to play the part?" Charlotte asked, her voice steady but uncertain. James glanced at her, his lips curling into a slight smile, though his eyes remained unreadable. "I've had my fair share of experience in society. I can manage." The word sounded rehearsed, too polished. Charlotte felt a flicker of doubt. "Good," she said, trying to convince herself more than him. "Just follow my lead. My grandmother won't let anything slip past her, and my cousin Marcus, well, he's not someone you want to disappoint." James didn't respond. Instead, he turned his attention to the snow-covered trees outside the window, his posture rigid. Charlotte frowned, wondering about the man sitting next to her. Who was he really? What had he run from? The carriage jolted to a stop in front of the Grand Manor, and Charlotte's stomach lurched. It was time. As they stepped out into the biting cold, she instructed James in a low voice, "Remember, you're my husband now. Act like it. We'll need to sell this story." He nodded, but there was no enthusiasm in his movement. They made their way into the grand entrance of the manor, the door swinging open to reveal a warm fire crackling in the hearth. The grandiose halls were decorated with garlands of holly, and the smell of roasted turkey and mulled wine filled the air. Charlotte steeled herself as she took in the familiar surroundings, the place where she had grown up, the place she would soon have to leave behind. It didn't feel like home anymore. Her grandmother, Lady Pemberton, was seated in the drawing room, her sharp eyes scanning Charlotte and James as they entered. The old woman's gaze was piercing, as though she could see straight through them. She studied James with the same scrutiny she reserved for everyone who came to her home, her lips pursed in thought. "Well, Charlotte," she said, her voice strong despite her frail body, "you finally brought your husband." Charlotte forced a smile. "Yes, grandmother. This is James Hartwell." James bowed deeply, his demeanor calm and composed. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Lady Pemberton," he said with a grace that surprised Charlotte. He spoke with a kind of politeness and confidence that seemed natural, as if he had been trained to be part of society's elite. Lady Pemberton studied him for a long moment before giving a curt nod. "I'm sure you'll find our home to your liking," she said. Charlotte could tell her grandmother was not convinced, but she didn't have time to worry about it. They moved to the dining room, where the rest of the family had gathered. Charlotte's cousin Marcus, ever the charming but cruel man, greeted them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His wife Annabel stood by his side, her smile as artificial as his. Charlotte could feel the tension in the room, the weight of everyone's gaze on her and James. Marcus immediately began questioning James, his voice smooth and probing. "So, James, how long have you known Charlotte? How did you meet?" He was trying to find a crack in the story, and Charlotte could feel the pressure building. James responded without hesitation, his voice steady and convincing. "We met a few months ago at a charity event. We've been courting ever since." Charlotte watched as Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "I see," he said, his tone laced with doubt. "And how long was your courtship exactly?" James glanced at Charlotte, his expression unreadable, before answering smoothly. "We were both very busy with our respective work, but we decided that Christmas would be the perfect time to formalize our commitment." The words were flawless, but Charlotte could sense Marcus's suspicion growing. Her cousin was never one to accept anything at face value, and Charlotte knew he would dig deeper if given the chance. The dinner began, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. But Charlotte couldn't help but notice how well James fit into the role. He knew which fork to use, how to hold a glass of wine, and how to engage with each guest. His manners were impeccable, almost too perfect. Charlotte found herself watching him closely, wondering if he had been trained in society or if there was something more to him than met the eye. During the meal, James shared a story about their supposed courtship, a tale of chance encounters and stolen moments. It was a moving story, And even Charlotte couldn't help but feel a twinge of emotion at his words. His delivery was so convincing that it almost made her believe it herself. But she couldn't forget that it was all a lie. Her grandmother watched James carefully throughout the dinner, her sharp gaze never leaving him. Charlotte could tell the old woman was suspicious, but she kept her thoughts to herself for now. After dinner, as the guests mingled, Charlotte found herself alone with James in the library. The two of them stood by the fire, the warmth of the room contrasting with the chill outside. Charlotte turned to him, her curiosity getting the best of her. "You're good at this," she said, her voice low. "Too good." James met her gaze, his expression guarded. "I've had my fair share of experience," he replied, his voice steady. "But that doesn't mean I'm pretending to be something I'm not." Charlotte frowned. "What do you mean?" James hesitated for a moment before answering, his voice quieter now. "I'm not who you think I am, Charlotte." Before she could respond, a guest entered the library, and the moment was lost. Later that night, as the guests began to leave, Charlotte overheard a conversation between one of the other guests and her grandmother. The name Hartwell came up, and the guests seemed puzzled. "Any relation to the Hartwells of Somerset?" they asked. James's face went pale, and he quickly changed the subject, but the damage had been done. Charlotte's mind raced. The Hartwells of Somerset were an old and noble family, and if James was truly connected to them, there was more to the story than he had let on. As she made her way back to her room, Marcus cornered her in the hallway. "There's something off about your husband," he said, his voice low and insistent. "I don't trust him." Charlotte hesitated, then responded firmly, "He's my husband, Marcus, and you need to respect that." But even as she said the words, doubt began to creep into her mind. Who was James really? What was he hiding? And why did he seem so familiar with the ways of the aristocracy? As she lay in bed that night, the weight of the evening's events settled over her. She had married a man she knew nothing about, and yet something about him felt real. But what was the truth? And would she ever uncover the secret James was hiding? She closed her eyes, tried to silence the questions swirling in her mind, but sleep would not come. The following morning, Charlotte awoke to a cold, pale light filtering through the thick curtains of her room. She had barely slept, her mind racing through the events of the previous evening. James's perfect performance at dinner, his easy command of high society etiquette, and that unsettling conversation in the library, all of it kept replaying in her mind. She had promised herself she wouldn't question it, that this marriage was purely a business arrangement, a means to an end, but as the morning light crept in, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to James than he let on. As Charlotte made her way downstairs, she found James in the sitting room, staring out the window, his posture rigid, his eyes distant. There was a restlessness about him, something that hinted at the burden he carried. He turned when she entered, offering her a faint, polite smile. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Charlotte didn't return his smile, her own curiosity pushing her forward. "I need to speak with you," she said, her voice steady, but there was an underlying edge to it. "Last night, there's something you're not telling me." James's expression faltered for a fraction of a second before he masked it with a neutral gaze. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone carefully controlled. Charlotte took a deep breath, stepping closer. "I overheard a guest mention the Hartwells of Somerset. You didn't seem too eager to talk about it. And when I asked you last night if you were pretending to be something you're not, you hesitated. Who are you, James? What aren't you telling me?" The air between them grew heavy, the tension thick enough to cut through. James's lips tightened, and for a moment, Charlotte thought he might walk away, retreat into the cool detachment that had marked his behavior since their hasty marriage. But instead, he sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I never wanted you to find out this way," he began, his voice low and filled with a weariness Charlotte had never heard before. "But I suppose it was bound to happen sooner or later." He paused, then turned to face her fully, his eyes meeting hers. "I am Lord James Hartwell, the youngest son of the Earl of Somerset. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. The name Hartwell had long been associated with old money, with estates in Somerset that stretched for miles. If James was indeed Lord James Hartwell, then everything about their arrangement was a lie. "But you told me you were just a man looking for work," Charlotte said, her voice barely a whisper. James winced, the guilt flashing across his face. "I ran away, Charlotte, after my brother's death. I couldn't face the responsibilities that came with being the heir to the estate. I thought if I left everything behind, maybe I could escape the grief." His voice cracked slightly as he spoke, the weight of his confession hanging heavy in the air. "My older brother, Thomas, was supposed to inherit everything, but he died in a riding accident 3 months ago. I should have been the one to take over, but I couldn't. I couldn't bear the thought of stepping into his shoes." Charlotte's mind whirled as she processed his words. James Hartwell, the man she had married in desperation, was not only nobility, but he was the heir to an estate, a fortune beyond her wildest imagination. And yet, he was running from it all. "You ran away after your brother's death?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "But why? Why wouldn't you step into the role you were born into?" James's eyes darkened, and a shadow of pain crossed his face. "Because I was the one who argued with him. The last words we exchanged were bitter ones. I blamed him for everything, for the weight of the title, for the expectations placed on us. And then he rode off in anger and he died." His voice faltered, and he took a shaky breath before continuing. "I found him, Charlotte. I found him lying there, broken. He was barely alive, but he held on long enough to say, 'It's not your fault, James. Take care of them.'" His words trailed off, and Charlotte could see the pain in his eyes, the burden he carried. "You couldn't forgive yourself," she said softly, the realization dawning on her. "No, I couldn't," he whispered. "I should have been there, should have stopped him from riding in such a state of anger. But I wasn't, and now I can't go back. I couldn't face my family, couldn't take on the role of the heir when I had failed so miserably." The weight of his grief seemed to press down on him, his shoulders sagging under the emotional burden. "I took your offer because I needed one more day to run, to pretend. But I didn't expect to grow close to you, Charlotte. I didn't expect to start caring about anything again." Charlotte stood in stunned silence, her heart heavy with sympathy. She had thought James was hiding some dark secret, but it was a secret of grief, of guilt, a secret of a man too broken to face the world he had left behind. She had known pain in her own life, losing her parents, losing her connection to her family, but she had never faced the kind of guilt James carried. The silence stretched between them, and Charlotte's thoughts whirled. She had never intended for this marriage to become real, to involve any emotion beyond the transactional. But now, as she looked at him, really looked at him, she saw the man behind the facade. "I don't know what to say," Charlotte admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been running from something much bigger than a marriage contract. But I can't pretend I'm not conflicted. I've spent my whole life building something, protecting it, and now I have to help you protect your own future." James gave a bitter laugh, the sound hollow. "I'm not sure I'm worth protecting, Charlotte." Charlotte shook her head. "Everyone deserves a second chance." She hesitated, then added, "But I won't lie. I'm still not sure what to make of this whole situation. You're not just a stranger to me now. You're a man with a title and a past I don't understand." James's eyes darkened again, a flicker of something deeper in them. "I don't want you to pity me. I just want to figure things out, to stop running." Charlotte felt a pang of something she hadn't expected, a connection, a bond that had formed between them, without either of them realizing it. She stepped closer, her voice quiet but firm. "Then stay. Help me secure my future. And then, when you're ready, we'll figure out yours." James nodded, his face softening. "Thank you. I don't know what's ahead, but I'll stay." For the first time since their hurried marriage, Charlotte felt a small flicker of hope, though she knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. As they stood together in the quiet library, The weight of their shared secrets and unspoken feelings hung between them. But Charlotte also knew that the truth had a way of changing everything. What she didn't realize was that their journey together had only just begun. The tension in the manor was palpable as the days passed. Christmas had come and gone, and the festive spirit that usually accompanied the season seemed to have evaporated. Charlotte couldn't shake the conversation she had with James, the vulnerability he had shown her in his confession. She had expected him to be a nobleman, proud and detached, but instead, he was a man broken by grief, struggling to find his place in a world that had been forced upon him. She couldn't help but feel sympathy for him, though she knew that their situation, this marriage, was still far from ideal. It wasn't real, not in the way a true marriage should be, but the more time she spent with James, the more she found herself drawn to him. She hadn't expected to develop feelings for him, but there was a tenderness to his actions, an earnestness in his eyes that made her question her own feelings. Still, she couldn't let herself forget why she had married him in the first place. Survival, her inheritance, was at stake, and as much as she cared about James, she couldn't afford to let her emotions cloud her judgment. The day after Christmas, Charlotte found herself sitting with her grandmother in the drawing room, the two of them alone for the first time since the chaotic dinner. Lady Pemberton, though frail and sickly, still had the sharpness of mind that made her a force to be reckoned with. She had been watching James closely, just as Charlotte had, and there was no mistaking the glint of suspicion in her eyes. "I'm not blind, Charlotte," Lady Pemberton said, her voice low but steady. "I can see the way you look at him. You allowed yourself to grow attached." Charlotte froze. "Grandmother, no need to deny it," Lady Pemberton interrupted. "I've seen it in your eyes ever since you brought him here. But I won't let you throw away everything we've worked for. Marcus is a snake, but at least he knows what he wants. This man, James, he's hiding something, and I won't let him use you to gain what he wants." Charlotte's heart raced as she met her grandmother's gaze. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm just trying to survive." "Survive?" Lady Pemberton's lips curled into a knowing smile. "You're not just surviving anymore, Charlotte. You're falling in love." Charlotte's breath caught in her throat, but she refused to admit it, refused to acknowledge the growing feelings inside her. "I don't have time for love. I have a bookshop to protect, a future to secure. And what about your heart?" Lady Pemberton's voice softened, though her eyes were still sharp. "You think I haven't seen the way he looks at you? He's not just playing a part, my dear. He's falling for you, too." Charlotte shook her head, trying to dismiss her grandmother's words. "It's not like that. It's just business." Lady Pemberton raised an eyebrow. "Then why does it feel so much like something more?" Charlotte couldn't answer. She didn't know how to explain it. How every moment spent with James seemed to break down the walls she had carefully built around her heart. But she couldn't afford to be weak. She had a responsibility, not just to herself, but to the people who depended on her bookshop, to the future that was slipping further out of reach. As if on cue, Marcus appeared in the doorway, his face an unreadable mask. "Ah, Charlotte, I've been looking for you," he said, his tone smooth but laced with a hidden edge. "I need to speak with you about your husband." Charlotte's pulse quickened. She had known Marcus wouldn't let this go, that his suspicions would only grow. But she wasn't prepared for what came next. "You see, Charlotte," Marcus continued, walking into the room with a calculated grace, "I've done a little digging into James's past, and what I found might surprise you." Charlotte's stomach churned. She knew Marcus well enough to know that his digging was never innocent. He had a way of twisting the truth to serve his own purposes, and she was certain he wouldn't stop until he destroyed her marriage, or what little of it was left. "What have you found, Marcus?" she asked, her voice strained but calm. He gave her a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, nothing too dramatic. Just a few inconsistencies in James's story. For example, did you know that the Hartwells of Somerset are an old and respected family? Yet, your husband claims to have been living in squalor. Does that sound right to you?" Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Marcus continued, his voice growing more insistent. I've spoken to a few people who know the Hartwells, and none of them have ever heard of a Lord James Hartwell being in hiding. In fact, from what I've gathered, James isn't even the heir to the estate. His brother, Thomas, was. And now, suddenly, James appears out of nowhere, claiming to be the rightful heir. Don't you find that strange, Charlotte? The man you've married is nothing more than a fraud. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. She had known there was something off about James's story, but this was more than she had expected. Marcus wasn't just questioning his title. He was accusing him of being a fraud, of using her to get closer to the inheritance. "You're lying," Charlotte said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "James isn't like that. He's not a fraud. He's just lost. He's running from his own guilt." Marcus's smile widened. "Oh, I'm sure he's running from something. But that doesn't mean he's not using you for his own gain. If you want to keep your inheritance, Charlotte, you need to make a choice. You either annul this marriage, or I expose him to the fraud he truly is." The threat hung in the air, cold and suffocating. Charlotte's mind raced. She couldn't let Marcus win. She couldn't let him destroy everything her grandmother had worked for. But could she trust James? Could she trust a man who had lied to her, who had kept so many secrets? "You don't know the full story," Charlotte said, her voice quieter now. "James didn't run because he wanted to. He ran because he couldn't live with the guilt of his brother's death. And I don't care about his title. I care about him." Marcus's face darkened, and he took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You're making a mistake, Charlotte. A big one. If you don't do what I say, I'll expose everything. Your precious bookshop won't survive the scandal. And neither will you." The words cut through Charlotte like a knife. She knew Marcus wouldn't back down, but she wasn't about to let him dictate her life. "I won't let you ruin everything," she said, her voice fierce. "You may think you have power, Marcus, but you're wrong. This isn't just about inheritance or titles. This is about love, and you can't destroy that." Marcus's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Charlotte thought he might lash out. But instead, he turned on his heel and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, shaken but resolute. As the door clicked shut behind him, Charlotte felt a chill settle over her. She had made a decision. She would fight for James, for her marriage, and for the future she believed in. But she knew the battle was far from over. And as the days passed, the tension between her and Marcus grew, the stakes higher than ever before. In the end, Charlotte knew she would have to face the truth about James, about his past, his guilt, and the secrets that could tear them apart. But she couldn't let fear dictate her choices. Not anymore. She had a future to protect, and she would do whatever it took to secure it. The next evening, the air in Pemberton Manor felt tight and heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Even though the snow outside lay soft and quiet over the grounds, Charlotte could feel the tension in every glance, every lowered voice, every pause in conversation, and she knew Marcus was behind it because he'd been too quiet all day, watching her and James with sharp, calculating look that made her skin crawl. And when Lady Pemberton asked everyone to gather in the drawing room after supper, Charlotte's heart started to pound because she could sense something was about to happen, something that would change everything again. The fire crackled, throwing warm light over the room. But as Charlotte all felt cold as Marcus stepped forward, his expression smooth, his tone polite, yet edged with triumph as he said, "Aunt, before we all retire, there's a matter we must address, a matter of legality and truth." And Charlotte's fingers tightened around the back of the chair where she stood, while James stood beside her, quiet but alert, jaw clenched. Lady Pemberton lifted her head, her eyes sharp in her tired face, and replied, "Get to the point, Marcus. My energy is not endless." And Marcus smiled as if he were doing them all a favor and said, "The matter is this, the validity of Charlotte's marriage." And the room buzzed with shock as heads turned towards Charlotte and James. But Marcus raised his hand to silence them and continued, "You see, when a man signs a marriage certificate under a false name, that marriage can be considered fraud. Your James Hartwell neglected to sign with his full legal title, Lord James Hartwell of Somerset, And that, I'm afraid, calls the entire union into question. Charlotte's chest tightened at his words. She glanced up at James, whose face had gone pale, and in that moment it hit her that Marcus had found the one weak spot they hadn't thought about, the small technical detail that could undo everything. The room fell quiet, the kind of silence that made every heartbeat sound loud, and Lady Pemberton's gaze drifted from Marcus to James, then to Charlotte, her eyes deeply thoughtful, and she said, "Is this true?" in a calm but tired voice, and before Charlotte could answer, James stepped forward, shoulders squared despite the strain in his eyes, and said, "I signed as James Hartwell. That is my name. I did not intend fraud. I was not hiding my identity from the priest. I was hiding from myself." And there was a soft murmur around the room, a mix of curiosity, disbelief, and judgment. But Marcus only leaned in, smelling blood, and replied smoothly, "Intent or not, Aunt, the law may not be so forgiving. A title indicates status, property, legal standing. Its absence changes everything. If the marriage is invalid, the inheritance defaults to the earlier will. To me," he added with the smallest curl of his lips. Charlotte's anger flared, hot and sharp, but before she could speak, the butler appeared at the doorway, clearing his throat. "Begging your pardon, my lady," he said, "but Father Benedict from the village has arrived and wishes to speak with you. He says it concerns Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell." The timing was so sudden, so exact, that it felt almost like fate stepping into the room, and Lady Pemberton nodded once. "Show him in," she said, then fixed her gaze on Marcus. "Perhaps we will have clarity after all." Father Benedict entered, carrying his hat in his hands. Snow still melted on the edges of his cloak. He was a man of late middle age with kind eyes that now held a grave seriousness as he looked from James to Charlotte, then to Lady Pemberton. "Thank you for receiving me so late, my lady," he said. "I came because I heard there are questions about the Hartwell marriage, and I thought it best to clear them now before rumors grow legs." Marcus smirked faintly but tried to hide it. "Yes, Father," he said, voice smooth. "We simply wish to know whether this union is valid, given that our dear James may not sign in his full legal style." Father Benedict turned to James, studying him with a familiarity that Charlotte didn't understand, then gave a tired, gentle smile. "You always did make trouble for yourself, James," he said quietly, and Charlotte's eyes widened in surprise. "You know him?" she blurted out, unable to hold back. The priest nodded. "I baptized him as an infant," he said simply. "I knew his father. I knew his brother. When he came to me on Christmas Eve, dressed in worn clothes, but with that same Hartwell look in his eyes, I knew at once who he was, even if he did not want to admit it." James looked down, shame flickering over his face. "I did not want my title to follow me," he said. "I just wanted one decision that wasn't about duty." Father Benedict inclined his head. "And yet duty follows us anyway, doesn't it?" He turned to Lady Pemberton. "My lady, when James signed a certificate as James Hartwell, I added Lore myself beside the name before filing it in the church records. It was done with full knowledge of his identity and birth. There is no fraud here. The marriage is legal and binding in the eyes of the church and the law." The words seemed to fill the room like a bell tolling. Charlotte felt her knees almost give way in relief, and a rush of gratitude toward the priest washed through her. Marcus, however, went rigid, his face twisting in a flash of anger before he smoothed it over into something colder. "You had no right," he began, but Lady Pemberton cut him off sharply. "He had every right. As the officiant," she said, her voice firm in a way Charlotte hadn't heard in weeks. "And I have every right to declare this matter settled. The marriage stands. The inheritance stands. Charlotte is my heir, and James is her lawful husband." Marcus's jaw worked like he wanted to argue, but for once, he had no ground to stand on. He turned away, his eyes dark with fury, and Charlotte knew this wasn't the last she would see of his schemes, but for now, she felt one chain fall away from her heart. Father Benedict gave her a gentle smile and touched her shoulder as he passed. "Trust what is real, not what fear tells you," he murmured, then left as quietly as he'd come, his work done. When the room finally cleared and only Charlotte, James, and Lady Pemberton remained, Charlotte expected relief to settle fully in her chest. But instead, a new kind of tension took its place. Lady Pemberton leaned back in her chair, looking suddenly older, her face pale, her breathing shallow. "The law is spoken," she said softly, "but now the heart must do the same. Do not waste what you've been given." Then, with a tired wave of her hand, she signaled for them to leave her to rest. Later that night, in the quiet of their shared room, James stood by the window staring out at the snow, his shoulders tense. Charlotte watched him for a moment, then said softly, "We won, you know. The marriage stands. Marcus can't take the estate now." James did not turn. "Yes," he said, his voice low. "You have what you needed." The way he said it made her chest ache. "We," she corrected. "We have what we needed." There was a long pause. Then James said, "Charlotte, I can't stay here forever." The words hit her like a blow. "What do you mean?" she asked, though part of her already knew. He turned then, his eyes full of conflict. "My family needs me," he said. "The Somerset estate is failing without proper leadership. There are tenants who depend on Hartwell land for their livelihoods, workers who need wages, families who need stability. I left them. I ran. But I cannot keep running while living under another roof, holding another woman's hand, pretending I built a life when I've only borrowed one." Her throat felt tight. "So you're saying you have to go back?" she said quietly. He nodded. I don't know how to do it yet, or when, but I know I can't avoid it any longer. The priest was right. Duty follows us." He took a breath, then stepped closer. "Charlotte, I don't want to go alone. Come with me. Be my wife in truth, not just on paper. Be Lady Hartwell, mistress of Somerset, not just a woman who saved my name for a season." Her heart twisted. The idea of leaving her village, her bookshop, the only home she had known, sent fear spilling through her. "Everything I have is here," she said, her voice shaking. "My bookshop, my customers, the life I built with my own hands. If I leave, what will become of all of that? Who will look after the people here? This place is part of me." James looked pained, but he nodded. "I understand," he said. "I would never force you. I just had to ask. I had to give you the choice." The next few days passed in a strange, quiet misery. Christmas wreaths still hung on doors, candles still burned in windows, but inside the manor the joy felt muted. Charlotte and James moved around each other like ghosts, polite but distant, each trapped in their own fear of what came next. They ate at the same table, but their conversations were short. They passed one another in the halls, their eyes meeting only briefly before looking away. Lady Pemberton watched them both with a knowing sadness, saying nothing, as though waiting for pieces to fall into place. Charlotte clung to her bookshop like a lifeline, spending more and more time in the small, warm space in the village, stocking shelves, talking to regular customers, anything to avoid thinking about the choice looming over her heart. One afternoon, as snowflakes drifted lazily past the shop window, Charlotte decided to host a little reading for the village children. She spread blankets on the floor, placed a plate of ginger biscuits on a low table, and pulled out a well-loved book of Christmas tales. Children trickled in, cheeks flushed from the cold, their eyes bright with excitement. As she read, their faces softened, their mouths parting in wonder at the magic in the stories. And for a while, Charlotte forgot everything else, lost in the simple joy of sharing stories with those who needed them. When she looked up halfway through a chapter, she saw James standing just inside the doorway, watching quietly. He hadn't announced himself. He didn't interrupt. He simply stood there, leaning against the frame, his expression soft in a way she hadn't seen in days. After the reading ended and the children scampered out, chattering and laughing, one little girl with dark braids hung back, tugging shyly at James's coat as he stepped forward. "Mr. the girl asked, glancing at Charlotte and then back at him. "Are you the princess's prince?" Her small hand pointed at Charlotte, who stood by the counter with a book still in her hand. The question hung in the air, innocent and direct. James looked down at the child and up at Charlotte, and something broke open in his face. His voice was quiet but firm when he answered. "I'm trying to be," and Charlotte felt her heart thump hard against her ribs at the truth in his tone. After the girl left, the shop fell quiet again. Charlotte busied herself stacking books that did not need stacking just to have something to do with her hands. James walked closer, stopping at the counter. "You're good with them," he said, nodding toward the door. "With the children. With everyone, really." She shrugged, keeping her eyes on the books. "Books saved me when I had nothing else," she said. "I just try to pass that along." "You do more than that," he replied. "You give them a place to feel safe. You gave me that too, even when you didn't mean to." She swallowed hard, setting the book down. "James, He cut her off gently, but not unkindly. "Charlotte, we can't keep drifting around each other like this," he said. "We need to talk honestly. No more pretending this is just about inheritance or duty." Her chest tightened. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of choosing wrong. Afraid of losing everything if I follow you. Afraid of losing you if I don't." James stepped closer, resting his hands lightly on the counter, as if afraid she might bolt. "I don't want a wife who's with me because she feels trapped by circumstance," he said quietly. "I don't want you to come to Somerset out of obligation. I want you to come if you come, because you choose me, because you believe there's a life we can build together, even if it's hard. I won't resent you for loving this place. I love that you love it. But I need to know, am I just a contract to you? Or am I something more now?" The words cut straight to the core of her fears and hopes, and for a moment she could hardly breathe. Memories flashed through her mind, his steady hand signing their marriage certificate, his gentle voice reading beside her by the fire, the haunted look in his eyes when he spoke of his brother, the way he stood up in front of everyone and claimed her as his wife without flinching. "You're not just a contract," she whispered. "You stopped being that the moment you told me the truth. Maybe even before that. I told myself I wouldn't feel anything, but I do. When you're near, I feel calmer. When you're in pain, it hurts me. When you smile, it feels like the room gets warmer. I don't know if I'm ready to leave everything behind, but I can't pretend I don't." Her voice broke, and James's eyes softened, full of something deep and unguarded. "Don't what?" he asked gently. "Don't love you," she finished, the words trembling but real. "I love you, James. That scares me, but it's true." For a heartbeat, everything seemed to stop. Then James let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, half broken, half joyful. "I loved you by the third day," he said softly. "Maybe the first. I tried not to. I told myself it was temporary, that you were just a bright flame I'd stand near for a little while before going back to my darkness. But you kept pulling me into the light, and now I can't imagine going back without you." Tears stung Charlotte's eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of what they were finally saying out loud. "Then what do we do?" she asked, her voice raw. "Your estate, my shop, your duty, my roots. It all feels like it's pulling in different directions." James reached across the counter and took her hand, his grip warm and sure. "We figure out together," he said. "Maybe there's a way to have both. Maybe we divide our time. Maybe we build something new. I don't have every answer yet, but I know one thing. I'd rather face uncertainty with you than false certainty without you." Before she could answer, the bell above the shop door jingled again, not with a customer this time, but with a butler from the manor, his face pale and drawn. "Miss Charlotte," he said urgently, not even correcting himself to my lady, which told her something was very wrong. "You must come at once. It's Lady Pemberton." She collapsed. "The doctor is with her, but he says you and Mr. Hartwell should be there." The world seemed to tilt beneath Charlotte's feet. The warmth of the shop, the glow of the fire, the safety of that moment with James, all of it blurred into background as fear shot through her. She and James exchanged one brief, stricken look, then rushed out into the cold, snow crunching under their boots as they hurried back toward the manor, hearts pounding in sync. When they reached Lady Pemberton's room, the doctor was just stepping back from the bed, his expression grave. Charlotte rushed to her grandmother's side, James close behind her. Lady Pemberton looked smaller than ever beneath the blankets, her skin pale, her breathing shallow but steady. The doctor cleared his throat softly. "She's very weak," he said gently. "I'm afraid it will be days at most. You should stay close." Charlotte felt the words land like stones in her chest. She turned to her grandmother, tears spilling over now. "Grandmother," she whispered, taking her hand. Lady Pemberton's eyes fluttered open, and she gave Charlotte a faint, tired smile before letting her gaze drift to James. "There you both are," she murmured. "Good. I wanted to see you together." Her voice was thin, but her eyes were still clear, still sharp enough to see straight through them. "No more pretending," she said, her tone soft but firm. "I don't have time for your pride or your fear. I want to see you truly happy before I go. Not acting for my sake, not bargaining for land. I want to hear you say what you really want. Don't waste the gift you've been given. Life is shorter than you think." Her eyes moved from one to the other, full of love and warning both. "Promise me," she whispered. "Promise me you'll be honest with each other, and that you'll choose love, not fear." Charlotte squeezed her hand, sobbing quietly. "I promise," she choked out. Beside her, James's voice was low and rough as he added, "So do I?" Lady Pemberton's fingers curled weakly around theirs, and a small, satisfied smile tugged at her mouth. "Good," she breathed. "Then I can rest." As the night deepened and they sat by her bedside, Charlotte felt the weight of her grandmother's words settle over her heart, like a blessing and a challenge all at once. The legal questions were solved, but the real question, the one about what kind of life she and James would build, still waited for an answer. And now there was no more time for running, no more room for half-truths or safe distance, only the choice that would shape the rest of their lives. The days that followed felt like a slow, tender goodbye. The snow outside the manor lay thick and quiet, and inside, everything seemed to move around Lady Pemberton's bedroom, as if the house itself knew time was running out. Charlotte and James spent long hours at her bedside, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in silence, listening to her soft, uneven breathing. One afternoon, when the winter light was thin and gold at the edges of the curtains, Lady Pemberton motioned for Charlotte to come closer, her one strong hand now fragile, but still firm as it wrapped around her granddaughter's fingers. "Close the door," she whispered, and Charlotte did as she asked, feeling James pause at the threshold. "Both of you," Lady Pemberton added, her voice weak but with a trace of that old authority. When the door clicked shut and the room was quiet except for crackling of the fire, Lady Pemberton turned her eyes to Charlotte, and there was a gentleness there that broke Charlotte's heart. "My dear girl," she said softly, "your mother would be so proud of you. You have more courage than you think." Charlotte swallowed, blinking back tears. "I do not feel very brave, grandmother," she admitted. "Most days I feel scared of losing you, of making the wrong choice, of failing everyone." Lady Pemberton gave a faint, knowing smile. "Courage is not the absence of fear," she murmured. "It is doing what is right even when fear screams at you to run. You stayed here when others would have left. You built something with your own hands. And now, you have opened your heart to a man who is not convenient, not simple, not safe. That is courage." Charlotte bowed her head, tears spilling onto their joined hands. "I do love him," she admitted in a hoarse whisper. "I tried not to, but I do." "Good," Lady Pemberton replied, her tone firm for a moment. "Then do not spend the rest of your life pretending you do not." She shifted slightly, grimacing with pain, then turned her gaze to James, who had come closer to the bed, his face grave. "Come here, Lord Hartwell," she said, the title spoken with deliberate respect. James stepped to the other side of the bed, taking her frail hand in his. "I am so sorry this is happening," he said quietly. "You deserve more time." She shook her head faintly. "We all think we deserve more time," she replied, "but we are rarely asked. What matters is what we do with what we are given. You ran from your grief, James, but you came back. That counts for something. And you chose my Charlotte when it would have been easier to stay alone." Her eyes sharpened for a moment. "Take care of her. But listen to me very carefully. Do not turn her into something she is not. Do not drag her into a life where she has to shrink to fit you. Let her be exactly who she is, a woman who loves books, people, and stubborn ideas. If you cannot love that version of her, then you do not deserve her at all." James's throat tightened, and he bowed his head slightly. "I swear to you," he said, his voice thick, "I will never ask her to be anyone but herself. I will build a life that has room for her dreams as well as mine." Lady Pemberton's eyes softened. "Then you will do well," she murmured. "Now, both of you, promise me one more thing. Be honest with each other. No bargains in the shadows. No half-truths. Life is too short for games." They both promised, their voices overlapping in the stillness, and Charlotte felt the weight of that promise settle deep inside her, heavier and more sacred than any legal paper or spoken vow. For a brief moment the room felt peaceful, almost warm, and Charlotte allowed herself to hope that these last days might pass without more upheaval. But she should have known Marcus would not accept defeat quietly. It happened the next evening, when the doctor had gone and the house was hushed. Charlotte and James were in the study reviewing accounts of the bookshop, trying to plan for a future that still felt fragile, when the door swung open and Marcus stepped in, a folded packet of papers in his hand and a dangerous gleam in his eyes. "Well, cousin," he said smoothly, "I have tried to be patient, but it seems I must be the one to face what everyone else is too sentimental to admit." Charlotte stiffened. "We have nothing to say to you," she replied coldly. "The priest made it clear. The marriage is valid, and grandmother's wishes stand." Marcus smiled, all false charm. "Ah, yes, the marriage," he said. "Quite a touching little victory, I admit. But I'm afraid your celebration is premature." He placed the packet on the desk, tapping it with one finger. "You see, before you dragged this mysterious husband out of thin air, Aunt Pemberton had already prepared a will. A proper one. One that names me as the sole heir to the estate. This," he unfolded the paper with a flourish, "is that will." Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face as she stared at the document. It looked old, the parchment yellowed, the ink dark, Lady Pemberton's looping handwriting clearly visible across the page. Her heart pounded. "You're lying," she said, but her voice lacked strength. "Grandmother changed her mind." "Did she?" Marcus asked mildly. "Perhaps she only intended to. Perhaps she simply never got around to signing the new one. The law cares about signatures, not intentions." James stepped forward. His eyes narrowed. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. "It was placed in my care long ago," Marcus said smoothly. "Aunt thought highly of my sense of responsibility, if you recall." His lip curled slightly on the word. "And now, with her health failing, it would be tragic if a hasty, legally questionable marriage robbed a rightful heir of his due. The court will look very kindly on this document." He looked at Charlotte, his eyes cold and bright. "Unless, of course, you wish to avoid the unpleasantness. Annul the marriage quietly. Step aside, and I will see that you are given a modest allowance. You can keep your little bookshop, perhaps even a cottage, but the estate, the land, the tenants, they are mine by law." For a moment Charlotte could not breathe. Everything she had fought for seemed to tremble on the edge of a cliff. She expected James to explode with rage, but instead he took a slow breath, then looked at Marcus with a frightening calm. "You want the estate," he said. "Fine. Take it. I have land of my own, more than enough to support Charlotte and anyone else we choose to help." He turned to Charlotte, taking her hand. "I will use my own fortune to secure your future. We do not need this place if it costs you your peace." Charlotte jerked her hand back, staring at him, stunned. "No," she said sharply. "You will not throw your birthright into the fire for me, and I will not be shamed into taking the scraps Marcus offers. Her eyes blazed as she turned to her cousin. You think I will let you bully me into giving up everything? No, we will contest this. We will fight. James started to protest, but she held up a hand. We are partners now, she said, her voice steady. We face this together or not at all. A flicker of pride moved through James's expression, and he nodded once. Together, then, he said quietly. Marcus's cool smile wavered as he realized his threats were not landing as planned. You can play at defiance all you like, he said, color rising in his cheeks. But the law is on my side. That will is signed and witnessed. It will stand. Charlotte's eyes narrowed as she leaned in to look more closely at the document. Something about the ink bothered her. It seemed too dark, too crisp for a paper that was supposedly drafted long ago. She reached out, running her fingers lightly along the margin. It looks very fresh for such an old will, she said softly, almost as if it were made recently. James stepped closer, examining it as well. And here, he said, pointing to a portion of the signature line. The ink blots slightly, as if the hand hesitated. Your aunt's hand was always sure, was it not? Charlotte's mind raced back to letters, notes, lists she had seen her grandmother write over the years. The curve of the letters on this will seem just a fraction off, the pressure different. You forged this, she said suddenly, turning to Marcus, her voice ringing with disgust. You thought no one would look closely, because she is dying and cannot defend herself. How dare you? Marcus snapped, his composure cracking. I am trying to protect this family from your foolishness. Enough! Came a voice from the doorway, thin but sharp. All three of them turned to see Lady Pemberton standing there, supported by the maid on one side and a cane on the other, her face pale, but her eyes blazing. I heard every word, she said, her breathing shallow. Marcus, bring that will hear. He hesitated, color flooding his face, but under her unflinching stare he obeyed, carrying the document to her with stiff movements. She took it with trembling fingers, studied it in silence for a long moment, then let out a cold, humorless laugh. You fool, she said quietly. Did you truly think I would not know my own hand? This is not my writing. This is an insult to my intelligence and to this house. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but she cut him off with a look. This is forgery, she declared. Crude forgery at that. The ink is wrong. The style is wrong. And I never would have written such lofty praise of your character. Her lip curled. I have known you too long. James moved to her side. Ready to steady her, she faltered, but she stood tall, fueled by anger and something like triumph. Get out, she said to Marcus, her voice shaking with effort but clear. Leave this room now. We will speak of what consequences you face later, when I have more strength. But know this, you will never inherit this estate. Not now. Not ever. Marcus's face twisted with fury and humiliation. For a moment, Charlotte thought he might explode, shout, or lash out, but instead he drew himself up, his eyes cold and hard. You will regret this, he hissed. All of you. Then he turned on his heel and stalked out, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the room like the final note of a long, bitter song. Lady Pemberton swayed, and James stepped in to support her, easing her into a nearby chair. She sat there, catching her breath, then looked at Charlotte with softer eyes. I am sorry you had to see that, she said. I had hoped he might grow into a better man. But some men choose bitterness over growth. Charlotte knelt by her chair, overwhelmed with relief and sadness all at once. I thought we were going to lose everything, she whispered. But you did not, Lady Pemberton replied, because I am not as foolish or as frail as everyone thinks. She nodded to the maid, who fetched a small wooden box from the bedside table and brought it over. Lady Pemberton opened it with shaking hands and pulled out a folded stack of papers bound with ribbon. This, she said, placing it on Charlotte's lap, is my real will. Signed, Witness, Filed with a solicitor weeks ago. A copy was left in my keeping, too, just in case someone tried something like this. She gave a faint, tired smile. I changed it when I realized I did not want to leave this world without seeing you secure. Charlotte unfolded the document, her eyes skimming over the words. It was all there in clear, firm handwriting. The estate left to Charlotte, with certain funds set aside in trust for the tenants and their families. But there was more. A library? She breathed, looking up in surprise. Lady Pemberton's eyes softened. You think I did not notice what lit you up inside? She asked. Your bookshop is your heart. So I have arranged a trust to turn a wing of this estate into a public library, the Lady Pemberton Memorial Library. If you'll permit an old woman a little vanity, the villagers will have access to more books than they could ever dream of. You will oversee it. Your little shop will not vanish, it will grow. Charlotte's throat tightened as she imagined the high ceilings of the old gallery filled with shelves and tables, children reading by the windows, villagers coming in from the cold to borrow books. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say you will do it, Lady Pemberton replied. Say you will fill this house with words and laughter instead of greed and silence. Charlotte nodded, tears running freely now. I will, she said. I promise. Lady Pemberton turned to James then. And you, she said softly, do not think I have forgotten your needs. I have spoken with your family's solicitor. A portion of my funds has been set aside to help restore your Somerset estate. Repairs, wages, seed for the tenant farms. Call it a wedding gift if you like. Or call it an old woman's peace offering to a young man who lost his way. James stared at her, stunned. You owe me nothing, he said, voice rough. I ran away from my duties. And then you came back, she replied simply. Sometimes that is a harder thing. Take this help, not as a reward, but as a reminder that you are not alone. No man builds a future by himself. Slowly, James nodded, humbled. Thank you, he said. I will use it well. I'll make sure your name is spoken with honor in Somerset, too. She smiled faintly. See that you do. For a little while, they spoke of practical plans, how the estate could be managed so that Charlotte and James could divide their time, winters perhaps in Somerset, summers here, with trusted stewards overseeing what they could not be present for. The more they talked, the more the impossible began to feel like something real. A life rooted in two places, with books and land, people and purpose woven together instead of pulled apart. When Lady Pemberton grew tired, she closed her eyes and whispered, There's one more thing I wish to see before I go. Charlotte leaned in. Anything, she said. Tell us. Her grandmother opened her eyes again and looked at them both with a soft, almost playful spark. I did not see your first wedding, she said. I hear it was rushed and rather grim. I would like to see the real one. It took Charlotte a heartbeat to understand, and then her heart fluttered in her chest. You mean now? She asked. Here. Why not? Lady Pemberton replied. There's a priest in the village. Is there not? You are already married in law. But I would like to hear you speak vows to each other with open hearts, not clenched jaws. James looked at Charlotte, and the question passed between them without words. She felt no fear this time, only a deep, quiet certainty. Yes, she said. Let's do it. Within hours, Father Benedict had been summoned again, this time to the hush of Lady Pemberton's bedroom, where a small group gathered, the maid, the butler, the doctor standing back with respect, and Charlotte and James at the foot of the bed, their hands joined. There were no grand decorations, no music, no crowd, but somehow it felt more sacred than any grand church ceremony could have. Father Benedict spoke a few simple words about love, second chances, and courage, and then he nodded for them to share their vows. James looked into Charlotte's eyes, and his voice was steady, rich with feeling. Charlotte, he said, when I met you, I was a man running from everything that scared me, my title, my past, myself. I thought I could disappear. But you saw me, even when I was trying to hide. You challenged me, argued with me, believed in me when I did not deserve it. You taught me that duty does not have to be a chain if it is carried with love. I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the faith you have placed in me. I will protect you, listen to you, and walk beside you wherever we live, whatever comes. I will not run again, not from my responsibilities, and never from you. Charlotte's eyes shimmered with tears as she spoke in turn. James, when I went to the inn that night, I thought I was making a cold bargain to save my future. I thought I could lock my heart away and treat our marriage as nothing but paper and pretense. But you slowly, stubbornly broke through every wall I built. You carried your guilt, but you still showed kindness to others. You respected my dreams, even when they did not match your world. You made me feel seen, not as a woman in need of rescuing, but as your equal. I promise to remind you, every day, that you are not the sum of your mistakes. I will stand with you in joy and in sorrow, in Somerset and here, in crowded rooms and quiet moments. I will challenge you when you give in fear and hold you when grief returns. I vow to love you as you are and as you grow, without pretending we are anything less than partners. Father Benedict pronounced them husband and wife, in heart as well as law, as he gently put it, and James leaned in to kiss her, soft and sure, not desperate like that first rush night, but deep with promise. Lady Pemberton watched, a peaceful smile on her face, and when they turned to her, she lifted her hand weakly for them to hold. Perfect, she whispered. Now I can go in peace, knowing you have chosen each other, not just survival. That night, as the snow fell softly outside and the house grew still, Lady Pemberton slipped away in her sleep, her hand resting loosely on the blanket, her face calm. Charlotte wept in James's arms. Grief and gratitude tangled together like threads. The next day, as they sorted through her things, the solicitor arrived with formal papers and final instructions, but there was also a small sealed envelope addressed in Lady Pemberton's familiar handwriting. For Charlotte, to be open upon the birth of your first child. Charlotte held it carefully, the seal unbroken, her heart aching and full. She traced her grandmother's name with her thumb, then tucked the letter away in a special drawer. Not yet, she whispered. When the time is right. James slipped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close as they stood by the window, looking out at the estate that was now truly theirs to shape. The fight was over, the threats pushed back, and though their future was still full of unknowns, one thing was clear. They would face it together with love, sacrifice, and the legacy of a woman who had believed in them enough to give them both a second chance. The days following Lady Pemberton's passing were filled with a quiet sense of mourning, but also with a strange sense of relief. Charlotte felt as though a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders, but it was soon replaced by the reality of her new life. She had inherited the estate, just as her grandmother had wished, but the responsibilities that came with it were overwhelming. The bookshop, once a small, cozy retreat, was now a central piece of her future. It was her duty to ensure its legacy continued, expanding into something more. James, who had become an integral part of her life over the past few months, was by her side, helping her through the process of transitioning the estate into a space that was not only hers, but also a sanctuary for community. Together, they had begun transforming the manor into something that could honor her grandmother's love of reading and her vision for the future. The library, which Lady Pemberton had dreamed of building, began to take shape, with bookshelves lining the walls, each filled with volumes that had been carefully curated by Charlotte and James. James, though still adjusting to his responsibilities in Somerset, had become an invaluable partner, his background in managing the estate helping to ensure that every detail was attended to with care. They worked together seamlessly, their bond growing stronger each day. As they settled into their new routine, the transformation of the estate continued. The grand library was soon open to the public, and Charlotte couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as she watched the village come alive with people who shared her love for books. The library became a hub of activity, with children reading by the fire and adults attending book clubs and lectures. It was exactly what her grandmother had hoped for, a place where knowledge and community could thrive. Charlotte's heart swelled with pride as she watched James interact with the villagers. His once cold, distant demeanor had softened, and he was becoming a beloved figure in the community. He had taken on the role of Lord with a seriousness she hadn't expected, showing a level of care and compassion that surprised even her. The bond they had formed, born of necessity and circumstance, had blossomed into something deeper, something that went beyond the business arrangement that had brought them together. They had found a rhythm, a balance between their shared responsibilities and their growing affection for one another. As the seasons changed, Charlotte found herself feeling more at home in Somerset than she had ever felt in Pemberton Manor, the once familiar halls of the estate. Once filled with her grandmother's presence, now felt like a place of new beginnings. It was in Somerset that Charlotte truly came into her own. She had always been independent, but now, with James at her side, she was learning what it meant to share her life with someone else. They had their challenges, of course. There were moments of tension, moments when they disagreed on how to move forward, but they worked through them together. It was clear that their marriage, which had started out as a business arrangement, had evolved into something much more profound. Their love had grown in unexpected ways, built on a foundation of trust, mutual respect, and shared dreams. And yet, despite their growing closeness, there was always a part of Charlotte that felt a lingering sense of unease. Her bookshop was thriving, her family's legacy secure, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something still unresolved. The memory of Lady Pemberton's last words lingered in her mind, particularly the letter she had left behind. Charlotte had placed it in a drawer, telling herself she would open it when the time was right. But every day, she found herself putting it off. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the letter than just a final message of love and support. It wasn't until Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after she and James had met, that she found the courage to open it. She sat in the quiet library, the fire crackling softly in the background, and carefully unfolded the letter, her hands trembling slightly. The words inside were not what she had expected. "My dearest Charlotte," it began, "if you're reading this, you found what I always wanted for you, true love in a family. But there's something you should know about your parents' death. It wasn't an accident, and James's brother's death wasn't either. Someone has been targeting our families for years. The danger isn't over. Protect your child. Trust James. And look in the library behind the Shakespeare collection. There you'll find the truth. With all my love, grandmother." Charlotte's breath caught in her throat as she read the words. The shock of her grandmother's revelation sent a chill down her spine. Her parents' death had never felt like an accident, but to hear confirmed in this way, along with the revelation about James's brother's death, was more than she could process in the moment. It felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet, and she suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of dread. She had thought that their life together in Somerset, surrounded by the village and their growing family, would be peaceful. But now, with this letter, the past had come rushing back. She had hoped that the darkness of the past would stay buried, but it seemed that it was tied to something much bigger than just their family's losses. She set the letter aside for a moment, her hands shaking. The fire flickered in the hearth, casting long shadows across the room. She had never believed in fate, never believed that her life had been shaped by forces beyond her control. But as she looked at the letter, she couldn't help but wonder if this was the moment where everything changed. She glanced at James, who had just entered the room, his face full of warmth, but when his gaze fell on her, he seemed to sense that something was wrong. He walked toward her, concern written across his features. "Charlotte, what's wrong?" he asked softly, sitting beside her. She didn't know how to answer him, didn't know how to explain the torrent of emotions swirling inside her. Finally, she handed him the letter, watching his face as he read. His expression shifted from confusion to understanding, and then to something darker, something that mirrored the unease she felt inside. "What does this mean?" Charlotte asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James didn't answer immediately. Instead, he sat quietly for a moment, his hand gently resting on hers. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "It means we haven't left the past behind. We may have found peace, But the danger is still there. Someone has been targeting our families for years. And now, it's up to us to protect what's ours." Charlotte nodded, her heart heavy. She had never wanted her life to be defined by danger and mystery. But now she realized that the future they had worked so hard to build together was at risk. They weren't just fighting for their love. They were fighting for their lives, for the future of their children. She knew, deep down, that they couldn't run from the past anymore. They had to face it head-on, together. And with that realization, Charlotte felt a surge of determination. She had a new purpose now, not just to protect her bookshop, but to protect her family, her legacy. She would face whatever dangers lay ahead with James by her side, and together, they would ensure that their future, one built on love, trust, and a shared vision, would endure. As Christmas Eve settled into the quiet of the night, Charlotte and James stood together in the library, the fire crackling softly in the background. The weight of the letter of the past still hung heavy in the air, but they were no longer afraid. They had each other, and together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Their love was strong enough to overcome it all. And as they held each other close, Charlotte felt the first true sense of peace she had known in years. They were ready for whatever came next. The tension between Charlotte and James had reached its breaking point. The discovery in the library, the letter from Lady Pemberton, had opened a door they could no longer ignore. What had seemed like a perfect new beginning, a life of peace, of new responsibilities and love, now stood on the brink of unraveling. The truth that Charlotte's parents hadn't died in a carriage accident, and that James's brother's death had been more than an unfortunate riding incident, left her heart pounding in confusion and fear. The past, which they both had tried so hard to bury, had returned with a vengeance, threatening everything they had built. The letter had hinted at a sinister conspiracy, a vendetta against their families that stretched back years, and now, Charlotte realized that they were being dragged into something far more dangerous than they had imagined. They were no longer simply two people trying to make the best of a forced marriage. They were caught in a web of lies, betrayal, and revenge. Charlotte knew that they couldn't ignore it any longer, not after the revelation her grandmother had left for her. As the days passed, they both tried to continue with their lives, focusing on the library and the future they had worked so hard to build. But every moment was overshadowed by the fear of what was to come. Charlotte couldn't shake the thought that they were being watched, that the danger her grandmother had warned about was closer than ever. She found herself looking over her shoulder constantly, jumping at every knock on the door, every unfamiliar face that passed through the manor's gates. They couldn't stay in the dark forever. And so, with a heavy heart, Charlotte turned to James. They had faced many trials together, but this was different. This was not just about their future. It was about survival. "James," she said one evening, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve. "We need to find out who did this, who's behind all of this, who killed my parents, who killed Thomas." James looked at her, his expression grave. He had been haunted by the past long enough, but Charlotte's determination had ignited something inside him. He knew that he couldn't run away from this anymore. The ghosts of their family's past were closing in on them, and they would have to face it together. "I know," James said, his voice steady. "We have to find the truth. But we have to be careful. Whoever is behind this is still out there, and we don't know who we can trust." They spent the next few days going through old records, letters, and diaries from their families. The evidence they uncovered only deepened the mystery. The connection between their families had always been a strong one. Both had been in business together for years. But what they hadn't known was that the partnership had soured long before their parents' deaths. Their grandfathers had once been close friends, but betrayal had poisoned that friendship, and as the years went by, the rivalry between their families had grown. Charlotte and James soon realized that the source of their troubles was a man long thought to be forgotten, Lord Blackwood. He had been a partner in the original business venture, but when he was caught embezzling, he had been publicly disgraced, losing everything in the process. But his revenge had been slow and methodical, working through the generations to destroy both families. He had made sure that Charlotte's parents were killed, and it seemed that his ultimate goal had always been to destroy the Hartwell family as well. The realization hit Charlotte like a ton of bricks. The vendetta was personal. They weren't just victims of chance. They were the target of a carefully orchestrated plot. And the final blow would come with the destruction of their estates. "We have to stop him," Charlotte said, her voice trembling but determined. "We can't let him destroy everything we've worked for." James nodded, his face hardening with resolve. "We won't let him." But there was more. The letter had mentioned someone close to them, someone they had trusted, being involved. It wasn't just Lord Blackwood pulling the strings. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but there was still one crucial question. Who was the person who had helped Blackwood all along? That's when they made the shocking discovery. The answer had been staring them in the face the whole time. Marcus, the very person who had been trying to tear them apart from the start, the one who had plotted to expose their marriage, had been working with Blackwood all along. Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face as she put the pieces together. Marcus had always been jealous of her inheritance, but now she realized his true motives. He wasn't just after the estate. He had been seeking revenge on both families for years, using Charlotte and James as pawns in his twisted game. "Marcus," Charlotte whispered, barely able to believe what she was saying. "He's been working with Blackwood all this time?" James's face darkened. "It makes sense. He's been trying to ruin us from the beginning. He's always wanted what we have, what your family has." Charlotte's heart pounded in her chest. She had always known Marcus was a threat, but this was something far more sinister than she had ever imagined. She could hardly believe it, but the evidence was irrefutable. They had no choice but to confront Marcus. They couldn't let him continue his campaign of destruction. But as they made their way to confront him, Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was too easy. Marcus had always been cunning, always had a way of staying one step ahead. There had to be more to this than they knew. The confrontation with Marcus was tense, the air thick with the weight of betrayal. "You've been playing us all along," James said, his voice cold. Marcus's face twisted into a smirk, the same smirk Charlotte had seen too many times before. "You finally figured it out, didn't you?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're not as clever as you think, James. You were always just a pawn in my game. And now, it's time to take what's rightfully mine." He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a piece of paper. Charlotte's heart skipped a beat as she recognized it. It was a forged will, the one Marcus had tried to use against her before. "You can't do this," she said, her voice shaking. "You can't ruin everything just to get what you want." Marcus laughed, a cruel, bitter laugh that sent a chill down Charlotte's spine. "It's too late, Charlotte. You've already lost." But just as it seemed all hope was lost, the door to the room flew open and a group of men entered, led by a man Charlotte had never expected to see. "Enough," the man said, his voice commanding and authoritative. "Marcus, you are under arrest for your role in the deaths of Charlotte's parents, for your collaboration with Blackwood, and for attempting to steal the Pemberton estate." Charlotte's eyes widened in shock as she realized who the man was. It was a representative from the local constabulary, someone who had been investigating Marcus for months. "You've been caught, Marcus," the officer said, stepping forward. "It's over." Marcus's face twisted in rage as he was taken away in handcuffs, but Charlotte couldn't bring herself to feel satisfaction. She felt only exhaustion, only relief. The danger had passed, but it had come at a heavy cost. As Marcus was let out, Charlotte and James were left standing in the silence of the room, their lives irrevocably changed. The past had come back to haunt them, but they had survived. And now, they had a chance to move forward, to build the life they had always dreamed of together. Their love had been tested, but it had endured. As the days passed, life began to return to normal. The library continued to thrive, and James's estate in Somerset slowly began to recover from the damage done by his family's past. Charlotte and James, now fully united, looked ahead to the future, knowing that together they could overcome anything. And as they sat in the quiet library one evening, their hands intertwined, Charlotte finally allowed herself to believe in the future. Their future. The future they had fought so hard to create.